what I weigh, or maybe metaphorically also hinting that what you have done in terms of partition literature, stories, etc. You perhaps weigh more than me. But the point is that we have some standard narratives that we often regurgitate, we often talk about them, and they get circulated in the reproduction of the partition narratives. Even if you look at the canonical educational curriculum, the first book about partition that I happened to read was Train to Pakistan. That was in my house. My father had bought it from somewhere. So that was the first introduction. And that is part of educational curriculum also. You have Sadh Hasan Manto's The Dog of Titwal or Toba Tek Singh. These are part of the curriculum. So these we know about. Or for example, we have stories from some extracts from maybe Tamas, or you have Bapsi Sidhwa's Ice Candy Man. These are the narratives that we often come across. So we had one teacher during my master's days. He would ask a question that the moment I say Africa, what comes to your mind? So we have some uh, cliched images of that particular continent. Same way, when you talk about partition, we have some cliched authors, some texts in mind that we that come to our mind, and we begin to think through that lens about partition. And also, there is an urban metropolitan inclination towards it because for various reasons. So you have after 1947, you have new metropolitan cities. These emerged. No doubt they were before 1947 also, but post 1947, they became power also centered around Delhi, Lahore, maybe Karachi was initial capital of Pakistan. So these became the new power centers, and connected to publishing houses, connecting to corridors of power, and the production of partition narratives also through them. So this is the first thing that we find with regard to partition, because before we talk about invisible, we talk about the visible. What is visible in front of us? What are the texts? Even today, in our master's syllabus at University of Kashmir, we have Sadh Hasan Manto stories, and they continue year after year. So it seems as if the best way. No doubt, Sadh Hasan Manto has amalgamated a lot of things into his stories to make them very representative in many ways. But then he is not the only one. He also had his own subjective position, subjective dimension when he wrote about partition. Or you have Train to Pakistan or Bapsi Sidhwa, or Shadow Lines, Amitav Ghosh, talking about Calcutta on the other side, the eastern border. So most of them you have either the western border Punjab, or you have Calcutta, Dhaka, that boundary, that border. Some narratives getting pushed on, while so this is kind of a partition canon, if I may dare say that. A partition canon has emerged, which hardly remains challenged or displaced, so that you can have other kind of narratives that may fill those gaps, or does anyone even conceive of those gaps? Because uh, you have there was a very well-known novel. I think Chaman Nahal had written this novel Azadi. During my master's days, I began to write a term paper because there was once in one course we had to talk about post 1947 literature. I just happened to come across that novel Chaman Nahal's Azadi, and most of the students did not know about it. So very beautifully written, has won some awards also. Doesn't matter whether it wins awards or not, but then it had one. But not students had not heard about this novel Chaman Nahal's Azadi. Mumbai has one of its foci in the novel, and how it talks about partition is is way different from the other narratives, bringing other kind of experiences. So this is the visible part of partition literature. What you often find in media also, or some standard Bollywood films on this particular, or some novels that have been then adapted cinematically. They also feature before this. So I thought there is something wrong here, and some this gap wrong in the sense that uh, that certain stories, certain narratives, they do not figure anywhere in this mainstream partition literature. And why should we not talk about or write about? You know, a cynic may say that what then? You talk about the marginal narratives, what would happen? Maybe nothing would happen, but then at least you kind of try to bring them to the fore, or for your own subjective exhilaration, or unburdening of your own sense of guilt as to why these narratives are not there. So there we have these standard geographical and also narrative coordinates. So you have Lahore, Bapsi Sidhwal's Cracking India, Karachi, Kamila Shamsi Cartography, 2002, Calcutta, Vaswati Ghosh Victory Call in 1950. I'm not giving all the texts. I mean, uh, internet is full of texts that you can find about, but I'm saying representative geographical coordinates with regard to partition literature. So you have either Lahore, Karachi, Calcutta, Dhaka, Delhi, Amritsar. I'm sure you'll agree with me. When you hear about partition, you hear about these cities. You hear about Delhi, Amit Majumdar, his novel Partitions, or Anjali Anjati, Parted Earth, or Chaman Nahal. Chaman Nahal was a personal discovery during my master's days. For Amritsar, Khushwant Singh's train to Pakistan, northwest border. Urvashi Butalia, she has recently, a kind of a break from the narratives, and she did some ethnographic work and went out into the field, brought stories of women, because there was a gender bias in partition literature that uh, uh, due to maybe social sensitivities or cultural sensitivities, the repression or the violence that was faced by women, that was not brought into public. And Urvashi Butalia's this, the other side of silence, voices from the partition of India, where she uh, movingly, graphically depicts the violence that was faced through personal interviews, through field work, going out into families, those who were survivors, taking out their stories and actually graphically presenting them before the audience. Other people have also done Mushirul Hasan, etc., but I'm not going into all of that. But my point is that these are the so-called landmarks when you hear about partition literature. Now, now let us go to the invisible geographies, stories, or partition. What do I mean by partition? That perhaps partition, or the story of the partition, the long partition or the great partition, that perhaps also stands partition in the sense that there is one mainstream partition, and then you have the marginal partition. We have students in the audience, especially if you want to work on partition, you maybe think out of the box, look at something different, ask yourself some questions that may sound silly to you but may be very profound in the long run. Doing something different, if you still think as your future area of research as partition. The question may be why, let us say, the partition stands itself partitioned. What is the politics behind it? Do not those stories which are in the margins count? And if they don't count, why is it that they don't count? What is the relationship between them? Are we actually then reproducing the hierarchical dynamics that played out in the Indian subcontinent before the departure of the British. Is that getting now, you know, uh, mimicked in a way? We are copying the original hierarchies, where London stands replaced by, say, Islamabad, Dhaka, or Delhi. And we have new kind of centers which have overshadowed or cast into oblivion those peripheries or those areas in the outskirts of our imagination. Now here is Jammu and Kashmir, which this is the official map of India, but this is not the actual situation. You have part of it that is under the control of China, part of it is under the control of uh, Pakistan as it exists today, or West Pakistan as it existed before 1971. You have there's a line also in between. That is the actual line of control. The actual line of control is this. If you can see, there are uh, these hyphens in between the black ones. So on the east side, you have the part that is under the control of India, but and then on the other side you have and this shoulder of an area that is the Aksai Chin that is part under China, right? And the red is the official map of India, which I am supposed to show here. Now there was migration on this map also across this line of control, and massive migration. But you don't find any, any big, any standard text on this kind of. You may have locally being circulated, locally being talked about, but not mainstream to the extent that you find it in educational curriculum, or you find it in the maybe official discourse, or you find it uh, in the national maybe press, or those. You understand what I mean? Now, here you had migration of both Sikhs who came from across the border into Kashmir. Then you had Hindus who came from across the border into Kashmir, and then you had also there was a community of Europeans that was in Kashmir at the time of partition, 1947. So then you had Muslims who migrated from Jammu towards towards Pakistan, and these you may not even have heard. They are not part of that larger discourse that gets produced, reproduced, circulated in the corridors of power, in the syllabi that gets taught uh, in schools or colleges or universities. And let us come now to closer home to what I am talking about. I am focusing on four narratives, basically, invisible narratives. And I'm only taking up the representative narratives from them, not representative, not in the sense that they represent the whole gamut of experiences of the people to whom this narrative, particular narrative belongs, but a sample from that, not claiming to be representative. First one is a short story, Vapsi. This short story is written by contemporary Sikh writer who lives in Kashmir and is even today in Kashmir a well-known writer, Ratan Singh Kamal. Then there is another short story. The first one is in Urdu. This is a multilingual four items here. First one is in Urdu. Gauri's Devgam is a Kashmiri short story by Ratan Lal Shant. Then Azad Desh Ke Gulam Log, Slave People of a Free Country by Rami Desai. She's a well-known freelance writer and social activist doing work. Then the fourth one is Scarlet Sword. It is a novel written by H.E. Beatties in 1950. So the first one is one that talks about Sikhs that migrated from Mirpur and Ali Beg prison from the Muzaffarabad area into Kashmir. Then you have second one is actually a 1990s story written by Ratanlal Shant, in which Kashmiri Pandits or Kashmiri Hindus migrate from Kashmir Valley into different parts of India, but principally they stay in the refugee camps of Jammu. Third one, very interesting. It is a book written by Rami Desai about the West Pakistan refugees. Now, these are Hindus, mostly scheduled caste, who migrated to India but stayed mostly in the then princely state of Jammu and Kashmir. Because when they came over to Kashmir, at that time Jammu and Kashmir was a princely state, and this princely state was, ruled by the Prime Minister of Jammu and Kashmir. Because for a long time, Jammu and Kashmir as a princely state had a prime minister. It was later on then future political developments into which we will not go, and something else happened, and then other changes took place. The fourth one is Scarlet Sword by H.E. Beatties, well-known British novelist, and he talks about the trapped missionaries in Kashmir in 1947 and what happened to them. So let us go to them one by one. We have this Wapsi short story. The short story is about Harnam Singh and his wife Jeevan Kaur and their daughter Preeto. Now they have migrated from Mirpur and also the Ali Beg prison in Mirpur area, and they have come over to Kashmir. And now, after a long time, they are not yet able to reconcile with the fact that they have lost their daughter, whom they lovingly call Preeto. She has disappeared in the mayhem, the violence of partition. Now, remember, this short story was published very recently. And one of the reasons why it came recently, because for a long period of time, a total silence, hardly anything. Maybe the literacy rate among Sikhs was not so much. They did not, it is a minority in Kashmir, just maybe 1% or 2% of the population. Invisible from the local power structures, invisible from the local publishing network. So it was recently published, which itself is an indicator that now some people are actually beginning to look at these stories. So Harnam Singh and Jeevan Kaur, they are very unhappy with the fact that they have lost their daughter, and Jeevan Kaur is distraught. And Jeevan Kaur is being told that she feels that her daughter may come back someday, but she doesn't. It is ultimately a Muslim whose name is Liaquat who is able to bring back Preeto back into the home. And when Preeto comes back, she is changed. It has been now many years since she returns back home, and father is happy, mother is happy, and mother feels very joyous that finally she's not able to initially recognize her, but then she does recognize her, and she feels very happy to know about this fact. But then what has happened is Preeto has now become Parveen because she had been abducted during that violence when the tribal invasion came from the other side, and Sikhs in the Ali Beg prison, thousands of them were killed, and so were Hindus in Irpur. And she was abducted by one, and she has now converted. She has now converted, and she has become from Preeto, she has become Parvi. Now that suddenly changes the atmosphere in the house. What was being lovingly sought, what was being, you know, longed for, the daughter of the house, suddenly the perception of mother as well as father changes. Initially, mother was longing for her return. Now she seems to get a little bit cold. But it's a very difficult situation for both of them. Metaphorically, we are told that they seem to be hung between the sky and the earth as to what to decide now. tragic moral dilemma. There is an azan from outside. She begins to go for wuzu and she wants to offer prayers, and the mother is unable to find out where to place herself in relation to her daughter. So this is the wapsi. This is a kind of a wapsi, which is partially a wapsi. She is not she has returned, but she has not fully returned. Ultimately, she leaves the house because she wants to go back to her husband. She has now children. So uh, this is kind of a story that has not been presented. The story of the Sikhs who migrated from Mirpur. Mirpur was the center where a lot of Sikhs lived, and there was one place called Ali Beg prison. Ali Beg was actually a Gurudwara. Then later on, that was converted into a prison. Now, this is not to say that this did not happen when Muslims uh, in Kashmir at that time, because I'm not here talking about the Muslim migration from Jammu, where there was a massacre of thousands. I'm not even saying it was a retaliation. Maybe it was, maybe it was not. But I'm only saying that how a number of stories have simply disappeared. In the larger talk about the western border and the eastern border, how there were these smaller migrations, smaller maybe in scale, which did not receive that kind of attention, which they should have received. So this is one. So Harnam Singh, Jeevan Kaur, Preeto, Liaquat, their story, and how it actually evokes that past when in 1947 the the so-called tribal invasion backed by the Pak army came over, ran over the place. Many of them disappeared. And today, most of the Sikhs who live in Srinagar, they are mostly people who came from Baramulla region, which is close to the border. Because when the invasion happened, they moved from Baramulla to Srinagar areas. So in Srinagar today, you can find small localities of Sikhs, and they are the people who migrated from Baramulla because of what happened at that time, the invasion from the other side. The second one is Gauri's Devgam. Gauri's Devgam, it is a Kashmiri. Gauri is the name of the character. Devgam is the name of the village where she lived in Kashmir. Now, this is a 1990s story. You may ask me that if it is a 1990s story, why are you talking about in terms of partition? I am talking about this in the context of partition because I feel partition is a lived is an ongoing reality in Kashmir. I don't think in other places there may be a sense of closure, if not a full closure. But in our place, uh, partition unfolds every day, or the memories of partition, or maybe it is an unfinished chapter of that partition. So this story takes us back to the migration of Kashmiri Hindus from Kashmir into Jammu and some other parts of India. And remember that contemporary Indian politics is in many ways shaped by what happened in Kashmir in the 1990s. If you look at the genealogy of the contemporary Indian politics, you'll find that the some of the roots can be traced to the migration that happened, which was, you can say, capitalized by forces for their own particular good. Whichever way, so this is a story of a woman who has to leave Kashmir because of the circumstances in 1990s, because most of the Kashmiri Hindus they migrated around 5 lakh. There is a dispute about figures, 6 lakh, 10 lakh, whatever. So a major chunk, only some families are living behind in Kashmir. Most of them had to leave. Now, what does she do? When she reaches the refugee colony in Jammu, she has hidden something in a trunk. And what is that? She has brought her idol, the local village idol that was installed in the local temple. She brings that and she brings it to the refugee colony. And she wants to construct a temple for the people in the colony. But she's not able to, she doesn't have resources. She has pension from her husband, and her son gives little bit. There are family troubles, the daughter-in-law, son, and then the grandson. So there are a lot of issues in the family. But in spite of that, she's able to find some time and some resources, and then she begins to begin building a temple with the help of the local refugee people. And ultimately, she, takes out the cigarette from the trunk. It is the idol that she has brought from her village. Remember, the distance between Jammu and Kashmir is around maybe 300 miles or so. But temperature wise, contrast, it is pleasant out here. Even now, if you can see, the fans are off. Uh, the weather is quite, it is flooded with tourists. So this lady Gauri, she's an old lady now, and lived her whole life in Kashmir, used not used to the harsh weather of Jammu, and she then ultimately is able to install that idol. But the thing is, when she is asked as to what happened, why did you leave Kashmir, she says there was a flood. She does not name it. She says there was a foreign flood. Now, I'm saying that this flood is an offshoot of the previous flood of 1947. And we have flood. That flood goes on even now. Maybe the speed, the volume may sometimes come down, but the flood is ongoing. So this is, uh, we don't have much about uh, when Mahatma Gandhi came to Kashmir in 1947, he said there is a ray of hope. I can see a ray of hope here because he felt there is communal amity. Maybe he saw amity in contrast to the large proportion of violence across the Indian subcontinent. But the same Mahatma, when he was in Jammu, he saw the massacre of Muslims taking place there who then had to cross. And then he named some people, which we don't go into. I'm just so Gauri believes that her migration and the migration of her community was due to a flood that came from outside. She's not even blaming the local people that they were not responsible for what happened. It had come from outside. Maybe the local people then got emotionally charged and then they went with that flood and pushed out the Hindus. So these kind of stories are also invisible from the mainstream partition literature. We don't hear as to what happened. You know that a number of people from some of my extended family members, they are in Muzaffarabad area. In Muzaffarabad, very few people speak Kashmiri. It is not the name Kashmir for Muzaffarabad is a misnomer because Kashmiri is predominantly spoken in Kashmir around maybe 60, 70 lakh people. Around the world, it might be around 1 crore. But in Muzaffarabad area, most of them speak either Gojri or Pahadi. Uh, Kashmiri is spoken. Some of my extended, I used to hear from my parents and grandparent that they live in Muzaffarabad. They had to leave. We don't know about them as to how they left, what happened to them, what are their stories, because there's a larger partition literature flood under which the smaller streamers have disappeared. Not because maybe minority not having the political clout to make yourself. These stories of Sikhs who migrated from Muzaffarabad, or these stories of Muslims, they are now coming because some of their people from their families now getting education. They want to go to archives, find out family trees, look at the memories. They want to put them on record. Otherwise, uh, there is hardly any trace. So Gauri's Devgam, a very poignant tale which evokes the memories of partition. And how partition is a continual existing reality in Kashmir. It's a very touchy subject that one wants to talk about, but then one has to be very cautious in talking about it because, as I said, this is a open sore. So you touch it, there is a chance that many more things will come out, and then the sore may get bigger. Now these people have recently got some relief now. Now these are people Hindus who came from Sialkot area. Remember that between Jammu and Sialkot, there was a train connection. There was a railroad. It was between Kashmir and Muzaffarabad. There was a road connection, Jhelum Valley Road. But between Jammu and Sialkot, you see, when you think about Jammu and Kashmir are separated by these high mountains. While Jammu is continuous with the Indian plains, Kashmir it is like a bowl shaped in between the mountains. That had a connection with the Muzaffarabad area. But here, Jammu had a rail connection with Sialkot. A train went there, and uh, many people from Hindus, mostly scheduled caste, they came over to Jammu area, and Jammu and Kashmir at that time was a princely state, and only some issues it was controlled by India defense, external affairs, postal and communication. The rest was within the princely state. So when these people came from across the border, these Hindus, scheduled caste, they settled in Jammu, in parts of Jammu, different parts, Araspura, etc. When they settled, the problem with them was they did not have a permanent resident certificate, which means PRC. Until very recently, until the abrogation of Article 370, you needed to have a permanent resident certificate to be a citizen of Jammu and Kashmir. Now, since they did not have, and the Kashmir problem was still lingering, their status remained high. They were around uh, 3 lakh to 4 lakh people. Now, the problem with them was for about 60, 70 years that they could not vote, they could not get jobs, they could not get proper admission in education institutions, they could not own land. They had practically no right. So they mostly worked in as daily wagers, doing the low profile kind of jobs in the inner city areas. So these are the West Pakistan refugees that they did not possess a permanent resident certificate. And hardly now, if you look for any book, any novel, any story about them, you will not find. You'll only find this book Azad Desh Ki Gulam Log by Rami Desai, and perhaps she is also not from their community. Uh, but recently, after the abrogation, they have got now since the PRC has disappeared, there is a domicile certificate that you need now. And I feel I was in touch with some of them because I have written a paper that was published by Rutledge, the Caught in a Time Warp, the fate of the West Pakistan refugees. They have now got some relief, and the chairperson of the organization that they had created uh, for their rights, Mr. Lavaram Gandhi, he told me that now they have got a huge relief because of the legal changes that have occurred in respect to his community. So that was also a marginalized, invisible kind of partition tale that we had no idea about. Even I did not have. When I was asked to write something about these West Pakistan refugees, my first question was, who are they? Where from they have come? Their problem was also uh, multi-layered. One, they did not have PRC. Second, they were scheduled castes. So in the caste hierarchy also they were marginalized. And then in the larger partition picture, they didn't. You see, when you look at the official mechanism that was created after 1947 for the refugees, you hear about rehabilitation, giving evacuee property, home to give that. They are mostly Delhi, Punjab, and Calcutta, these places. In Jammu, we don't find the, maybe also because in Jammu, in Jammu and Kashmir, as I said in the beginning, the partition is ever present here. There is no definite certain closure to it. Maybe because of that also, people did not want to, spark any political problem, so they wanted to keep them silent. So in the discourse about problem, Kashmir as a problem, then this partition stories they got simply displaced. No one actually wanting to talk about them. Then Scarlet Sword, very briefly, I think we have also reached closer to 12. I will try to now, we have just one slide. So HEBT is Scarlet Sword. My own PhD work is on Kashmir English novel, and this was also one of those novels. At the time of partition, there were a lot of Europeans in Kashmir because Kashmir, as you know, was a tourist hotspot. They used to come. During the Mughal imperial times, also, Mughal rulers used to come here. They opened up gardens. So European presence was there, and then Christian missionaries also. A lot of work in the health sector or in the educational sector, the pioneers were, especially the modern education. You have the Christian missionaries having played an important role. So one of the Christian missionary center was in Baramulla, St. Joseph's. When the tribal invasion came, and these lot of the Hindus and Sikhs sought refuge in this St. Joseph's, but most of them were, killed when the attack from the other side came. No doubt, this is a small community, but my whole point in this lecture is the invisibilizing of many stories of partition and how we may be able we can resurrect those stories and try to put them, if not side by side, at least at some distance by their side, the larger, longer, and the deeper partition stories. How we can do that? So we have St. Joseph's that was ransacked, and a lot of these missionaries were killed. Their father Simpson, who now Archibates wrote this novel on the basis of a report that was submitted by Mr. Sidney to the Daily Express in London. It was a very detailed report, and that got a lot of publicity in the West, because of which also then the scales began to tilt. The scales of the British began to tilt in favor of one and against the other. When they heard about the ransacking of the St. Joseph's Catholic this mission in Baramulla. So in the West, and suddenly a lot of things, the old Oriental imaginary of the East, the Oriental imaginary of the Muslim, that perhaps got reinforced. And that also changed the game uh, during the partition days and during the violence that followed. And then the other political affiliations that also began to reconfigure in the eyes of the West. Now, why some partitions too? Now, there is a regional bias, obviously. So we have some geographical sectors receiving uh, importance, priority, because maybe the people associate, people belong to that region. They held, because when the migration from, I'm not an authority on the uh, partition narratives, partition literature, but most of the people who came, they began to settle in Delhi. And Delhi being the capital, they had access to power centers, they had access to publishing houses. Perhaps because of that, the stories got amplified and widely distributed. One of my teachers at uh, JNU, Professor Harish Narang, he often used to say when he taught us some partition stories, Altasa Mantu, he had translated also, that how he came from Sargodha. I still remembers him saying many times, I came across the border from Sargodha in Pakistan to Delhi, holding the finger of my father. So now they had the social, political, academic capital to, to give a wider press to their stories. just like Professor Harish Narang or many other people around who were there. Or there was a pre-existing literary culture that also shaped their helped them go up the ladder in terms of the publicity and giving amplifying their voices. Or networks of power, networks of powerful publishers, political sensitivities that let us not play up the trauma of partition because of political sensitivity in certain regions where there are other fault lines also. Let us not open another fault line. Majoritarian narratives. So in Jammu and Kashmir, Muslims being the majority, they don't, you know, playing down the narratives of Sikhs or Hindus or the Christians. Then canonical writers, we have Khushwant Singh as a journalist also. Then we canonize. And why certain things are canonized? Kanun, CNN. There is a whole politics behind that. Our brief right now is not to go into that. Then certain genres receive uh, acceptance in the market, maybe novel at some point of time or short story, and not other genres in which these invisible communities may have vented their own stories. And self censorship, also an aspect, not wanting to tell stories for certain reasons. Let us say in Kashmir, a Sikh not wanting to tell a story because of the existing social political climate. If I talk about this, then there will be 100 different stories from the other side. Let us so self-censorship aspect also is there. So we have some new initiatives like ethnographic works or independent researchers now coming into play or local regional publishers. But the question is it too late? Because if you want to get real on ground stories from some of these partition survivors, is it too late now? Because imagine how many years have passed. We have around 74, maybe 77 years have passed since then. How many of those people will be alive now to tell us the stories uh, of their migration, of their stories, of their uprooting from one place and then trying to settle in another place? When Rami Desai made a documentary on West Pakistan refugees, that was in 2009. At that time, she found some 80 plus years old people who could tell her as to what happened in Sialkot and then how they came here, how they were received by Sheikh Mohammed Abdullah, and then what promises were made. They could. But then, if you want to find out today, it may be already late. Now, you may have to rely on the stories that have second hand. So, first generation having told the second generation and then the third generation, then how much reliable stories? Would they be as reliable as by the first generation stories? So I think with that, I will like to conclude my talk. And again, I'm very thankful to the principal, honorable principal, Mr. Professor Sharif Zaman Sahab, for inviting me and for the vice principal Sahab for his remarks and Oksana Khan ma'am. And then we have the anchor person and all of you there who are in the audience, students and other faculty members, well-wishers. Thank you to all of you for being there and listening to what I was saying just now. Thank you very much. Your voice is breaking. I'm not able to hear properly. I don't know why.
Yes, sir. Now,
Yes. Now I can hear.
can yes. Yeah, yeah, actually there are some problems actually in sound system, I consider. So thank you very
Now I
much
can hear. Yes.
as you have definitely dissected. different aspects of partition and the sufferings, agonies, and whatnot. You have mentioned on thing, and we are very eager to know actually the things that you have said. There are partitions which are documents of partitions are available officially for official purposes, but there are some partitions, there are some stories hidden in some literary tasks, and most of the stories don't have the scope to come to the mainstream literature because most of the survivors are actually away from the writers, from the authors, and the stories are still unknown to the readers. And the stories are not described in the literary or academic courses. So the people, we are also actually engaged and involved in such kind of partition, but we are in darkness still because we are actually away from the stories as it is not prescribed and it is not mandatory for our academic purposes. Thank you so much, sir. Now I invite questions from the students who have patiently listened to the discussion of our honorable speaker. Please raise questions, students. From the students, questions are please come forward to raise questions. Students who are interested to ask questions to our honorable speaker, please come forward and ask questions.
Sir, other sir. Sir, could you please tell me what are the main reasons for dividing the Indian subcontinent?
Can you please re-say her question? I was not able to hear it.
Yes, so the question is what were the main reasons for dividing Indian subcontinent? What were the main reasons?
What were the main reasons
For dividing the for the division of India in different parts.
Okay, so it's a very big question, and and I don't think we have time enough to discuss, but we can broadly say that many political actors played a role in this. We have the British. Some argue that it was their hasty retreat from the Indian subcontinent, and there is a some may argue that the political leadership of both India and Pakistan at that time was stubborn to agree upon certain things, and because of which ultimately partition became inevitable. There are different theories. For example, Aisha Jalal, in her book The Sole Spokesman, she has written a book on Muhammad Ali Jinnah, wherein she says that partition until the end was only a bargaining chip. He did not actually want it, but he wanted to bargain with the other party by placing this demand. So, until the end, many people tried to perhaps avoid it, but it became inevitable because if I can put it very broadly and put it trying to be politically correct, that the stubbornness of the leadership from both sides and the role that the British played, that had they been a little slow and tried to work out things properly slowly, then perhaps things might have been different. But Our focus, real focus is here is on the narratives, the invisibility of the narratives, and not into the political genesis of partition as to why it happened and what happened. It's a big issue on which you'll find a lot of serious scholarship, and many people are still uh, doing work on this to find out. There may not be a real one cause, but a multiplicity of causes that perhaps made it ultimately uh, impossible to have one united subcontinent, though many did wish that it should happen.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Any more question? Another student comes to raise question and introduce yourself first and then.
From
A little louder, dear.
my question is to you that nowadays we are observing an acute sectarian intolerance in the subcontinent. Do you think that religion-based partition of the subcontinent is responsible behind this intolerance?
Ma'am, can you please repeat the question?
Sir, the question is, nowadays we are observing acute sectarian intolerance in the subcontinent. Do you think that religion-based partition is responsible?
Yes, that is true. There is a lot of polarization, and there is a lot of resurgence of sectarian forces, not only in India but also Pakistan and uh, maybe in Bangladesh. I'm not so closely watching the Bangladesh scene, but whatever little I know, that is true that sectarian forces. Now, the question is, how far is partition responsible for it? Now, imagine if India had been one and there were still, by the way, the growth of fundamentalism is a global phenomenon these days. From Europe to Africa to many other countries, the rise of fundamentalism, the rise of sectarian forces, it's a global, we have now Europe under the sway of these fundamentalist sectarian forces. So I don't know whether partition is responsible for it. If partition is responsible, then why in other countries also we have the rise of uh, fundamentalist or sectarian forces? Maybe partition has a role to play because the wounds of partition are still fresh, though more than 70 years have passed. There's a long memory of it, and maybe that is, as I said, these are very politically sensitive topics that one has to be very careful talking about whether that is responsible. If that had been avoided, maybe if that had been avoided, the population imbalance would not have been that much. That would have tried maybe neutralized the edges, the sharpness, the bluntness of mm, of the communities, because uh, you know sometimes I even ask this question whether if there had been no Kashmir issue, whether there would be still animosity between the two countries. So animosity, maybe it has a longer history than partition itself. The sectarian rise has a longer, deeper roots than even 1947. 1947 the violence of it, perhaps itself a symptom of that longer history of subcontinent. I hope I should have been there offline to have a chat with you and, and talk about these issues.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Any more questions from the students or the faculty members of the Department of English? Is anyone interested to raise questions? Is anybody interested? Now I request from the faculty members to raise questions.
Thank you, sir. Could you please listen to me?
Yeah, I can
Am I
hear you,
audible,
but
sir?
you please put yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Okay, thank you, sir. Could you please specify? You have used two terms, marginal partition and mainstream partition. So, with reference to your division of these two terms regarding partition, could you please tell me whether the rural areas and the metropolitan areas were equally touched by this partition or differently? What differences would you please mark?
Okay, yes. So your question about the rural areas and the metropolitan areas and whether partition had an equal effect on the rural and the urban population. Perhaps, that's a very good question. And only recently, the the impact of partition on rural populations was explored, especially Urvashi Mutaliash and what the research, the ethnographic works that she did. She brought about especially the women and that too in the rural areas, the trauma that they had to face then generation after generation. Now, specifically, if I limit it to Kashmir, since I belong to this place, have lived most of my life here, the people who came from these Sikhs or Hindus who came from across the border, most of them they belong to rural areas. And then what happened that they tried to find sanctuaries when they were pushed out of their rural areas. They tried to find sanctuaries the in the in the urban centers. So, for example, Mirpur was a city at that time, not a city, maybe a larger town. We had 25,000 population. From the rural areas, people came, they settled there with the hope that they may be rescued or there may be some help. But no help came and then they migrated. Now, then there was also a distinction in case of the, the facilities or the available remedial measures for these rural and the urban ones. Now, if you look at the migration of Kashmiri Hindus from Kashmir, they migrated from rural areas as well as the urban areas. But the people who came from rural areas, they had land, they had plants, they had many things in the village. So their migration is very different from the migration of a person from an urban area, because one, to some extent, the people from urban areas had some connections. They were maybe exposed, and the moment they went to a new place, migrated there, that was mostly also in urban area. They were used to kind of that atmosphere or maybe had some access to power centers also. But those who came from rural areas, totally isolated from even the neighboring village or neighboring villages, they had to face a harsher atmosphere in the new places. And then the focus also, the narration of stories. When I say mainstream partition literature, it is most of it is urban centric, most of it is metropolitan centric, and very little attention paid to migrants or refugees who came from the rural areas. I am saying this from the experience of the Hindu refugees from Kashmir to different parts of India. Those who came from rural areas, they had way many difficulties to face because, as I said, they were connected to land. They had rice cultivation, they had wheat, they had maize, they had walnuts. They were dependent on that. But the urban, more about business centric, had some business connections, though they also suffered tremendously. But from the experience of the refugees who left Kashmir, the Hindu refugees, the rural population bore, and most of them wanted to come back. And they did try to come back because their dependence was they did not have the business skills to orient themselves to a business skill in an urban setting. So, so yes, the the rural urban divide is also there, and uh, these West Pakistan refugees that I talked about, most of them came from rural areas, and that is why they wanted some land when they came to Jammu, but they did not have the land rights. So your question is very interesting, and yes, there have been responses to it, and very lately now we have the focus shifting towards the rural, the village, the countryside areas, and what happened there. And the very first novel, Train to Pakistan, written by Khushwant Singh, it is setting is Mano Majra. Mano Majra is a village, but even then they migrate towards Amritsar and then going towards Lahore. So it is difficult for an villager, a typical villager, to come and now try to settle in a urban setting because he is not used to that economics of an urban setting as he was in a village. So in Mano Majra, we have the Jagat Singh and other people who come to Amritsar and then they move on to Lahore. But if you look at Train to Pakistan, very few other novels have this setting of a village to get us give us a handle as to the way the village refugees suffered. So even there is some marginalization when you talk about the rural and the urban refugees.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your nice answer. I have one more question, Professor Sharif Akbar, sir. Could you please answer my question? Sir, I have a question for you. If you can please answer. Do we have seen many negative changes? Do we really have any positive aftermath of partition of India? Can we say any mention of any
Can you
positive
please repeat your
aftermath
question
of
using the smaller mic?
has partition brought about any positive aftermath with reference to India?
Okay, so your question is, has partition brought out any positive aftermath? Now, uh, I don't know whether there has been positive, positive in the sense of political empowerment in Pakistan or in India, or India definitely has because growth wise as an independent country, it also depends on whom you ask. For example, if you ask a person who is looking for cultural renaissance in India, some of them would say, yes, we have now our own authority. We do not have it in the past. We were able to bring out some cultural paradigm change in our cultural landscape. Now, if you then, for example, as I said, depends on whom you ask this question. Now, if in Kashmir, if you ask people, there will be a response that may not be to the taste of many people. Uh, Pakistan maybe it's a sad story, because even I can go on and on telling as to what is happening and whether partition and what was expected for partition by the leaders of that country, whether that has been realized or not. That is a grim tale getting grimmer with each passing day, as I can see from closer. Uh, okay, I mean the situation. I mean, was that envisioned when partition was conceived? When they thought of having the country. And then there is an ideological obstruction. What was the ideology, or what was it, or what was partition? Even there is a dispute again about that question. What is the correct answer? Why was it brought out? So you have three different people saying three different answers. That it was to create a social welfare state, that it was to create a Islamic maybe state. So if you have confusion about the ideological foundations, then definitely there is going to be problems in terms of conceiving how you want to shape your future. If you have no correct sense of the meaning of your foundations. So positive in the sense that yes, the British are out, and then growth, economic growth, welfare of the people, political empowerment. So, as I said, depends on the person, which political constituency you want to ask this question. There is a section of people that has definitely been empowered politically. They have got power. There is a there are there is a book, Franz Fanon. You know what is that? Black skin, white mask, something like that. But a new class has also emerged that has got power, and then they have got vested interest. They want to continue this. But at the mass level, yes, there have been changes. For example, if I speak about India, the level of literacy in 1947 and the level of growth at that time. And today, if there are hundreds of satellites circling around the sky from India or to some extent Pakistan, that many people would argue is because now we have, you know, this agency to do all these things which we did not have in the past. But then would these things have been there if the British had also been here? I think the maybe it is more of a psychological empowerment rather than concrete political, concrete economic, political, in which perhaps is some degree of satisfaction that it was a positive development, that we emerged from that yokes of tyranny. But as I said, with regard to Pakistan, I am not that uh, satisfied because I mean, what you see every day, I mean, which election since 1947 has remained uncontested? Which election is the foundation of a country? When you question the very foundation that I don't agree what you are doing, I don't agree with the results, then all that you do on the top remains. There's a doubt on that. So I don't want to go into politics of all this, but I'm saying, uh, you know, we need to discuss and we need to resurrect stories and narratives that have not received attention of minorities, especially because justice demands that we talk about people who have been marginalized, whether in our own country or in other countries, who, as a person who belongs to majority, I may be oblivious sometimes to what is happening to minority and why they are not talking. So this is one of my uh, goals that I organize sometimes conferences. There should be people from different communities who at least get some voice. There was recently an international conference that I organized at. There was this Ratan Singh Kanwal whose story I was talking about Vapsi, and he was mute, quiet all 2 day conference. That then one day suddenly he said, uh, nobody listens to six. And I said, sir, that is why you are here. We are here to hear you, and you talk about your community. And that is what justice demands, that we look after the people who are disadvantaged. And that is what our religion also asking us to look at the signs of nature and draw lessons from those signs, as in the Quran also says, "Wafil ardi ayatul lil muqin wa fi anfusihim afala tubsirun," that you see the signs. When a tree, uh, with the help of leaves and sunlight, photosynthesis, it makes food. Where does it reach first? It reaches the roots, and then the other parts. So the invisible part receives attention first, and then the visible parts. So that is what my aim